Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Frontline. I'm Colonel David Giammona on the Battle Ready Network, and now on Roku TV Remnant channel with Pastor Todd Coconato. We'd like you to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Battle Ready Network, and follow us on the web at battle-ready.org, where you can sign up for our newsletter, look through our store and our videos. Joining me today is our co-host, co-author, co-conspirator, Troy Anderson. Troy, good to have you on the show today, man.
It's a great honor to be here, Colonel.
As always. And we have the pastor. I call him senior pastor, but I was been corrected. It is lead pastor of Horizon Church in West Sacramento, Pastor Coco Perez. Brother, it's good to have you on the show.
Bless you, Colonel. Great to be on the program. Thank you for making that correction. I got to feel just a little younger, right?
That's right. And today we have a really great guest, a great friend, one of our board members, and just an overall great patriot of our country, Major General U.S. Army retired Bob Dees, who is president of the board for National Center for Healthy Veterans. Bob has served 31 years as an infantry officer, a senior military leader and strategist, and was the 2nd Infantry Division commander in Korea and the U.S.-Israeli Combined Task Force Command for Missile Defense. In 2015 and 16, he served as a national security advisor and chairman for Dr. Ben Carson's presidential campaign. He's authored 5 books, including books on resiliency and the Resilience God Style series. He and Kathleen have been married 47 years and have 3 children and 8 grandchildren. Bob, what a great honor to have you on the show today.
Well, Colonel David, what a great honor. I recall way back when we last connected on this recent season of life, you were playing the guitar, entertaining a bunch of chaplains, Special Operations Command, and I came to appreciate you as a musical entertainer before I appreciated the greater depths that you have reached into now. So God bless you. Great to be with you. I really applaud the Battle Ready Network and your good work, because it's needed more than ever today.
Well, to have someone of your stature on the show, we're honored. And you have a purview of the national scene and what's going on in our country. Everybody knows our country is not headed in the right direction. We've had a lot of issues. Kind of guide us through this as we go through the show today. Tell us what your take right now. What's going on in our country, brother?
Yeah, well, appreciate the question. I would provide a bit of context. I was a student at the War College in Washington, D.C., National Defense University, in 1992. And as a student, I observed all these discussions of elements of national power, energy and manufacturing and military hardware and all these different elements, the social, the communication, military, economic. And the bottom line is that I went to my Marine instructor and I said, something is missing here. And we haven't heard about the spiritual infrastructure of the country, which is really the glue that holds us all together. It's that intangible glue. And I said, spiritual infrastructure is also an element of national power. That put me onto a thought process that has continued to this day. And that was the genesis of the book, Resilient Nations, that I'll discuss in a moment. And it caused me to question where we are in America and ultimately where we are as a resilient or non-resilient nation. In the process of that, the Lord impacted me, and the first question he gave me, if I might do a quick screen share.
Sure, absolutely.
This is the verse out of Psalm 11:3, and it simply says, if the foundations are being destroyed, what can the righteous do? I think we have to understand, if we have our eyes open in America today, that the foundations are being destroyed. You know, it was God himself who breathed life and heart into America, into the soul of America. And we look at America today, and it's almost like we can't recognize it, and I suspect that God can't recognize it. And he understands our wayward ways and all of this, but the moral decline in our nation has just become very apparent, and that has led to implications in every area. You look in Resilient Nations, I talk about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In America today, we have a culture of violence and death. It started, way back. Think about the knockout games that were played in New York City, where somebody come up behind another person, just totally knock them out as recreation. Now recreation is stabbing somebody or looting a store with impunity, or rioting in America and throwing bricks through store glass windows with impunity. So the foundations of law and order, of civility, of life, even obviously the abortion and so forth, those are in fact being destroyed versus the culture of life that God intended. You look at liberty, really liberty has devolved into a culture of entitlement and a culture of bondage, bondage to a spirit of entitlement, a spirit of offense in America. And if somebody next to you is not exactly like you, then the culture is to demonize that person. And that's why we have a proliferation of special interest groups, not only in the LGBT community and so forth, but in every other community. If you're not just like the group that you espouse, then you're demonized and you're against us.
Right.
And that fights again against the civility in America. And then finally, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. We've gone from this focus on outcomes, focus on opportunity, equal opportunity, to equal outcomes. And we know that where that takes us into socialism, that takes us into bondage again. And so these very basic freedoms that are espoused by God through the litany of how he developed the law and the way America is governed today have been violated radically. And so it says, what can the righteous do? I know you, every broadcast, ask about what can you do? And it's not because we're righteous people, but it's that we are righteous because we're clothed in Jesus Christ. And it says in Proverbs, the wicked flee when no one are pursuing, but the righteous can be bold as a lion. So this day and age in America, America needs us. America needs this type of people that are on this broadcast, and because we need to be bold as lions. We need to proclaim the truth. We need to do what we can to return to those God-honoring foundations that God put in place. Now, I wrote this book, Resilient Nations, and in it, I said there's 10 pillars of American exceptionalism. In fact, this was what attracted Ben Carson and how I eventually became his national security advisor and campaign chairman. He looked at this and he said, this makes a lot of sense. And so you see these. I'm not going to talk about each one of these. I know you've had expert speakers address many of these on your program before, but when we violate the constitutional foundations, when we depart from the rule of law, when in religion and private and public venues, and public venues, that has been persona non grata to have religion in the public square. But God ought to be in every part of America, every thread in the moral fabric of America. Societal morality, we mentioned that. Healthy traditional families. God
Right.
produced, 3 institutions. It's the family, the state, and the church. And those are the primary building blocks of society that God put in place. Education, we know all the things swirling about education: unity, diversity, civility, industrious, resilient. There's that word. I'll talk about that in a minute. And then retention of national history and traditions. We see what's happening there in philanthropy and volunteerism. Those are all inside the borders of America, and I haven't even gotten outside the shores yet. You're getting outside the shores of America, and there's many other elements there that are challenging. This I said life, liberty on the world stage, but the reverse of that is the appeasement of others. Instead of
if I may for a second,
Please,
sir. I'm seeing all these things, and one of the things that I want to go back to, and I've asked this question a number of times on the show.
You bet.
Is this: how did we get here, and how do we get back to where we were?
Right.
What's your take on that?
Well, the musical group New Song has a recording called "Slow Fade," and regrettably, And also the scriptures record many times, that, it says all of a sudden the man's back is broken, or basically he's destroyed. Well, I think the reality spiritually and practically is it doesn't happen all of a sudden. It happens in a slow fade. Tournier, the Swiss theologian, says, we fall the way we lean.
Hmm.
So America has been leaning in the wrong direction for a long time. Eugene Peterson wrote a book called Obedience, Long Obedience in the Same Direction.
Right.
Well, the reality is America has not had long obedience, it's long disobedience in the same direction. And that has gotten us to where we are. In Resilient Nations, I record from 1740 up to about 1960, where verifiably America was a pretty resilient nation. Think about the Dust Bowl, the World Wars, all the Depression, all these different challenges America faced, and yet they came out at the end of that. But then they got into the 60s, and we start doing crazy things. The maybe socialist, communist, wild-eyed liberals, if I may use that term, had planted seeds of discontent that started blooming in the 60s. Things like the sexual revolution, things like the lack of dignity and respect for marriage and family, things like taking the 10 Commandments out of the school. So, I mean, each one of you could cite these various things. I know this is part of your whole body of content, but the point is we didn't get there automatically. And when we started violating, we started pulling these things out by the roots, one by one. Even the Great Society programs, well-intended at the first, created a pervasive spirit of entitlement where just in the past couple of years, there's more people that don't pay taxes than that do pay taxes. And for instance, right now in the enlistment pool of American youth for the military, there's less than 25% that truly qualify. The others are unable because of mental, behavioral, or physical issues. So that's a national security issue, but that didn't happen immediately. That happened because of our national fabric, our national ethic has deteriorated and is seriously unraveling at this point in time. We're almost in moral freefall.
Troy, I'm going to bring you in on this, our journalist and researcher, and you've been hearing General Dees talking. Your take?
Yeah, General, you mentioned that spiritual infrastructure is part of our national power. Can you talk about how the founders of our country and the military over the centuries in America understood that spiritual infrastructure is part of national power and is very important for what America has been and all the purposes that God has given America over the centuries?
Right. Well, in anecdotal terms, spiritual infrastructure is things like the education of our youth, as mentioned. Just think about the transference where the primary textbook in American education was the Bible, to now it's pornographic material. So, that would be an example. The ethics of our boardrooms would be another example of spiritual infrastructure and applied. And look at the ethics in our boardrooms of today and the corruption and all the things we see, and even bank failures and so forth. So there's a lot of practical things that we see before us that represent the demise. If you look at the military of today, the challenge is we have a politically correct leadership that has devolved. Frankly, my observation is that in the Obama years, you had strong civilian control and oversight of all general officer nominations from the Pentagon, and nominations for general officer and advancement in those ranks would not happen if you didn't pass a certain acid test. And so it didn't even get to the Senate for confirmation. And therefore, with these smaller cadre of politically correct and even what we would call woke today, general officers matriculating, over time, the ranks of the general officers went from, strong conservatism, understanding the American roots, understanding the principles of spiritual infrastructure. Not all of them necessarily people of faith, but they honored faith. They recognized the relevance of faith in the foxhole. all of those, those leaders have now evolved into a cadre of leaders that are really, that espouse critical race theory and don't even see anything wrong with teaching that at the military academy. And don't even see anything wrong with the military funding transgender surgeries and a place that cultural equity above military readiness. So it goes on and on, but we have leaned in the wrong direction, and frankly, very specific and intentional strategy by left-leaning, even socialist leadership have taken us to where we are today. How do we get back? That's a good question, David. I think we got to be Gideon's army. We got to be battle ready. We got to understand the deceptions that exist, and that will help us. Many people say, "Okay, General, what do we do next?" And I say, "I'm not the general. God's the general. I'm a private in his army." But the way he works is he doesn't lay out this grand strategy or through a man lay out a whole grand strategy. He calls on David and Pastor Coco and Troy and Bob, and he says, here's the calling I have for you, as we listen to his still small voice. And when we carry out that calling, then God, the grand strategist, weaves those sinews together to accomplish his purpose. So we need to listen and work our lane and fight and pedal like crazy. I think that's the answer for all of us collectively, if that makes sense.
Pastor Coco, you've heard General Dees talking about the spiritual infrastructure and all the things going on and corruption. Brother, come on into the conversation.
Thank you, General, for being on our program. You are a very important man right now during this time. Our country's going through deconstruction. Everybody knows it. All the Judeo-Christian values are leaving overnight. And it's really a sad time, but we can't get stuck, right? In that sadness, we have to rise up. You just said something that really reminded me of my wife. She always reminds me of my lane. Stay in your lane, right? Because pastors want to get in every lane, right? Possible, but that's impossible. And I think our lane today really is one of course, the fundamentals of prayer and of speaking the truth, which kind of segues into freedom of speech. Is that not a constitutional, foundational part of our country? And look at what's happening to freedom of speech. This program itself, maybe in a couple of years, may be outlawed. What are your feelings about that? Is that not a fundamental part of the Constitution that we're losing?
Yeah, well, thank you, Pastor Coco. My wife says the same thing about my lane. No, I'm kidding. By the way, Troy, we have our 50th anniversary later this year, so we're excited about that.
Congratulations.
To answer your question, I totally agree. It's a fundamental right. It's embedded. It's, I'm sure it's definitely a God-honoring principle, freedom of speech. The problem is, in America of today, it doesn't matter what is right. It doesn't matter what is legal. There are forces at play that will do what they can get away with. And so they're running hard and fast. Doesn't matter if it's illegal, the mainstream media and others will cover that up. It doesn't matter if they're violating people's freedom of speech, and there's great hypocrisy in letting some people talk and say things and not on the other side, particularly Christians this day and age. So I wish it weren't true, but that's why you guys are called Battle Ready Network. It is a battle. And if people could reason and honor freedom of speech and one another, then that's great. But it's a battle because if these forces will do what they can get away with, somebody has to blow the whistle. Somebody has to say, that's not true. That's not right. That's not just. That's not moral. That's not pure. And so we have to be sort of the referees on the field to help throw a red flag now and then and push back. I love the parents in Virginia. I'm in Virginia now. Governor Youngkin has spent a lot of time at our farm here and with the veterans and things. he won his election in Virginia because he recognized the passions of the Tiger moms, particularly in Northern Virginia, that wouldn't allow teachers to subvert the minds of their children.
Yes.
And then that's true across America. So that's a tangible example of how we push back, how we just have to say this far and no further, and it's a battle line, and you got to fight with all that's within you to win that battle.
In general, they made their voices known. They were screaming. Everybody knows the, viral video that went out, Loudoun County, correct?
Yep, you're on it.
And man, they blasted people, and well, it captured the headlines. I think in many ways, that's the only thing we could do right now, because nobody is reasoning. I mean, truth has been just thrown out the door. Just an amazing time we're living in.
Right. You have college professors being fired from their jobs, or in some cases even being threatened with jail for saying something as outlandish as that there is a man and a woman, and that's the way God created them.
Mhm.
It's a little crazy.
Yeah, General, as we're going to be wrapping up here in the next few minutes. I remember my time as a chaplain. I have 32 years in the military. And I remember going into battalion commanders and they were saying, well, I really don't need a chaplain. By the time we were done, and they knew the value of a chaplain, it was really a turnaround for them. Their eyes were opened and they could see that, hey, this is a valuable asset. It's a combat multiplier. In today's military, I'm not sure, I have been out of the loop for a while, but I have friends who are still in. What's the spiritual tone right now going through our military, and how do you see that from your foxhole?
Yeah, a couple of things briefly is that as an infantry officer on the battlefield, when people would be wounded, bleeding, hurt, even dead, or their buddies dead next to them, people don't cry out for the commander. People don't cry out for the political commissar. They cry out for the medic and the chaplain, because in their deepest soul, they understand that they are out of control or helpless, and they need help from the living God himself. So that's the first thing. There's a deeply held, that God puts in every man's heart, this vacuum, as Pascal says, to recognize that God is our hope and our defender, or the rock and the fortress, the tower to whom we can run. Secondly, I think that Don DeCostin was just selected as president of Liberty University. He was chief of chaplains of the Air Force.
Right.
I worked with him while he was still on active duty in that role, and he, more than most, connected the dots between spiritual fitness and military readiness. And so he was able to do that through extensive research and pulling up Dr. Koenig from Duke University and pulling some Harvard University research that illustrates the empirical validity of faith protocols in a whole number of areas, to include in the military. So we've got to be, we have to not only rightly divide the word of God, but as there is empirical evidence available, we need to use that as part of our weapons of war as well, because that is truth, that it makes a difference. In the military today, the spiritual tone, hard to say. I also have not been in the foxhole of recent, but I would in confidence say there are still God-honoring chaplains. They're fighting the good fight, but the American military is a microcosm of American society. So when you look at our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines coming in, I mentioned that they're in many ways not fit for service and don't even get into the military, but the ones that do, they're bringing in a greater cultural baggage than ever before in terms of wokeness and so forth. And then, I focus a lot on resilience. American youth of today, God bless, there's some great ones, but as a category, they are far less resilient. And instead of tennis balls that navigate adversity well, they were more like eggs. And then it's hard to put them back together, as with Humpty Dumpty.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that insight. We're going to have more. We're going to wrap it up for right now because of our time, but with the stay tuned, we have another whole show with General Dees coming. Sir, before we go, would you tell us how to get a hold of you, your websites, your contact information, and how people can tune into what you're doing?
Sure. Well, two primary websites. Thank you for asking, David. One is resiliencegodstyle.com. This is my website that's been developed over the last 2 decades. Resilience material, our books, videos, blogs, and so forth on resilience. It says not by power, by might, but by my spirit. So resiliencegodstyle.com. And then secondly, related to our whole veterans work that we'll talk about maybe in the next broadcast, is healthyveterans.org, healthyveterans.org. And in both cases, they can connect with me by just simply contact at healthyveterans.org, contact at resiliencegodstyle.com. Thank you, Dave. It's been a privilege to be with you today.
Oh, thank you, sir. And for those who are watching, stay tuned for the next show because it's going to be really, really good. But before I go, I have a question for everybody out there in the audience. Are you battle ready?